Zohran Mamdani was born in Kampala, Uganda, in October 1991, into a family whose origins and destinies would cross continents and ideologies. His father, Mahmoud Mamdani, a distinguished scholar of post-colonial studies, hailed from Uganda, and his mother Mira Nair, an Indian-born filmmaker whose lens had traveled the world. From the outset, Zohran's identity encompassed multiple geographies, cultures, and languages. At the age of 7, his family relocated to New York City, and what began as an immigrant journey would eventually become a microcosm of bold politics and generational change. Growing up in Queens, Astoria, and nearby neighborhoods, Zohran absorbed the heterogeneity of New York. Multilingual hallways, first-generation families, the collision of aspiration and real-world pressure. At Bronx High School of Science, he excelled academically, co-founded the school's first cricket team, and developed the discipline of self-reinvention that would later mark his political rise. He then attended Bowdoin College in Maine, majoring in Africana studies and taking seriously the question of power, how systems endure, how communities are marginalized, and how voices are silenced. He graduated in 2014 with a broader map of the world than most of his peers. Before entering the formal corridors of politics, Zohran Mamdani's early adult career was grounded in urban struggle. He served as a foreclosure prevention counselor in Queens, helping immigrant homeowners threatened with eviction. He worked with low-income families of color, learned the language of debt, housing crisis, and structural vulnerability. It is in those offices, on those kitchen table conversations, that he first encountered the gulf between rhetoric and reality. He spoke with taxi drivers crushed by medallion debt, with families priced out of neighborhoods they had helped build. The crises were systemic, but the solutions had always been framed as individual failures. He refused that framing. In 2020, at just 29 years old, Mamdani declared his candidacy for the New York State Assembly in District 36, Astoria, Long Island City, and adjacent Queens neighborhoods. He ran as a progressive, supported by the Democratic Socialist current inside the Democratic Party. He challenged a 5-term incumbent, Aravella Simotas, and harnessed a grassroots coalition of young voters, immigrants, service workers, and activists. His campaign message: affordability, housing justice, public ownership, reform of policing. He won the Democratic primary after a long count and secured the seat in November with no Republican opposition. He assumed office in January 2021. As a state legislator, Mamdani quickly made his voice heard. In committee hearings and budget negotiations, he pushed a fare-free bus pilot program, lobbied for tenant protections, and aligned himself with working-class struggles. He joined a hunger strike alongside taxi drivers, demanding relief for medallion-indebted owners, an act that symbolized his divergence from conventional legislative decorum. He declared early that politics should be rooted in the lives of the many, not the perks of the few. He became known among colleagues as a legislator who arrived at dawn for hearings, who carried files on housing policy rather than cocktail invites. By 2024, as New York entered a new era of urban politics, housing crisis, sharply rising cost of living, and debates over policing, Mamdani saw opportunity. He declared his candidacy for mayor of New York City for the 2025 election. At age 33, he was the youngest major candidate in the race. His platform was audacious: fare-free public transit, city-owned grocery stores in each borough, a rent freeze on stabilized units, a $30 minimum wage by 2030, strong climate and green economy initiatives, and tax increases on high-income earners and corporations. He pledged to shift the balance of power away from Wall Street, big real estate, and old-school machine politics. What made his trajectory compelling and alarming to the establishment was both his identity and his strategy. He was a Muslim of South Asian origin, a dual citizen early in life, raised in immigrant neighborhoods. He identified as a democratic socialist, emphasizing coalition politics with race and class at the core. He combined intellectual pedigree with street-level activism. He brought a global outlook into the boroughs of Queens. His campaign relied heavily on small-dollar donations, volunteer networks, and the idea of politics of affordability. New York City's classic machine had few models for someone built like him. His 2025 mayoral campaign hit a tipping point during the Democratic primary. Facing former Governor Andrew Cuomo, a name steeped in New York politics, Mamdani was initially written off by many analysts. But his message resonated with disaffected Democrats, younger voters, tenants squeezed by rent hikes, transit-dependent workers buried under fare costs. When the ranked choice ballots were counted, he achieved a dramatic upset, marking a possible electoral watershed. The moment signaled not just a shift in New York municipal politics, but a broader challenge to the National Democratic Coalition, progressive insurgency versus centrist establishment. Critics derided him as inexperienced, too radical, too ideologically pure. Some accused him of flanking too far left. Others targeted his foreign policy statements, especially his vocal views on Israel-Palestine, tax justice, and big business. But supporters framed the criticism as proof of his disruptive power. His win, they argued, was more than his own victory. It was the opening of a new chapter in urban politics, one where affordability, immigrant identity, and radical reform were central. Should he become mayor, the implications are profound. A young, democratic, socialist Muslim mayor of America's largest city, New York, would challenge established party alignments, real estate power structures, corporate dominance, and traditional mayoral pathways. It would signal that the electorate is beyond nostalgia for machine-era compromise, ready instead for bold change, younger leadership, and hybrid identities. For conservatives, it is a nightmare of progressive ascendancy. For younger voters, a new model of civic power. Yet the path ahead is steep. The practicalities of turning bold promises into municipal reality, fare-free transit, grocery stores owned by city government, rent freezes, will require alliances, budget gymnastics, and political resilience. Mamdani must balance radical vision with executive competence. Mayoral office is not a platform for manifesto alone. It is the architecture of governance, budgeting, crisis response, policing, public health, and infrastructure. The transition from protester to mayoral administrator is formidable. Beyond policy, Mamdani's personal narrative remains central. He married Rama Duwaji in 2025, lives in Astoria, Queens, and carries an immigrant-raised self-image into office. His father's academic framing of colonialism, his mother's cross-cultural film lens, his own language fluency and community roots. All these feed into his political style. Global awareness, local commitment, identity in service. His fluency across multiple languages and cultural frames gives him an edge in a city where neighborhoods speak dozens of tongues. But identity alone is not enough. The housing market in New York is in turmoil. Eviction rates rising, real estate barons powerful, transit agencies underfunded, inequality extreme. Should Mamdani assume mayoral office, he will face resistance from entrenched interests, real estate developers, labor unions cautious of radical change, state and federal agencies with competing priorities. The negotiation will test whether his insurgent campaign can convert into triumphant governance. Internationally, his ascent places New York under a different lens. US cities have often been laboratories for policy shifts, and New York now might tilt further left than many believed possible. The National Democratic Party, battered by losses in the 2024 presidential cycle, will watch his experiment closely. If Mamdani's victory leads to tangible progress on affordability, transit, climate, and equity, it may inspire other urban insurgents. If it stumbles, it could validate the arguments of centrists who caution against rapid reform without institutional support. For Mamdani himself, the stakes are personal. His being positioned as a symbol of a new era carries both uplift and pressure. He must deliver not just proposals, but measurable outcomes: reduced transit fares, stable rents, real-world grocery costs down, environmental modernization, safer streets without authoritarian overreach. The media will hunger for failures as much as for triumphs. His coalition must remain unified. The volunteer base must transition into governance, and his vision must survive the brutal realities of New York City bureaucracy. Moreover, the question of legacy looms large. Will Zohran Mamdani be recognized as the mayor who changed New York's economic trajectory, or as the insurgent who couldn't convert ambition into action? That question will define not only his career, but the pathway of progressive urban politics in America for years to come. As winter 2025 approaches and the transition to his assumed administration begins, his challenge is clear. He must move from movement to machine, from disruption to delivery. The skyline he seeks to reshape is not just Manhattan's towers, but the invisible architecture of class, race, power, and rights in America's greatest city. The experiment is audacious. A next-generation leader shaped by global migration, immigrant struggle, democratic socialism, and urban urgency. The success of that experiment is far from certain, but the fact that it is happening, and happening now, is significant. In short, Zohran Mamdani's life thus far is both story and signal. From Kampala to Queens, from housing councillor to state legislator, from challenger of the status quo to front-runner for mayor of New York. His win in 2025 is not simply a personal triumph. It might be a revolutionary step in US municipal politics, a crack in the old, and a blueprint for the new. How he governs will determine whether that step leads to lasting change or becomes a symbol of potential unfulfilled. Ultimately, his story is a lens on our era, the rise of immigrant-majority cities, the tension between austerity and abundance, the generational handoff from a post-millennial cohort. He stands at the threshold of the most demanding executive job in America. How he walks through that threshold, whether he stumbles, thrives, or transforms, will shape not only New York, but the blueprint of urban power in the United States.